today's event is a part, of the biggest gathering, futures literacy gathering in the history of future studies. So this event and us are actually now a member of the UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit. Apparently, according to Riel Miller, he said that this is a turning point for efforts to understand why and how people use the future. For the development of and diffusion of futures literacy in the whole world. As of this writing, the UNESCO reported that the summit has reached this milestone. 7,000 registered participants, and total is climbing every hour. So the target is to reach by at least 10,000 registered participants, because this will continue until tomorrow. And we have like around 40 plenary videos of speeches and futures conversation available on demand in the video library. So if you haven't signed up in the UNESCO registration link, I would like to encourage you, to register. We will be sharing to you the registration link later so you can check out the videos. And of course, we are pretty really like privileged and honored that they have included Secretary Leonor Briones as one of the plenary speakers of the UNESCO Futures Literacy event. And just to give you an update, an overview, there is like around 97 content-rich booths online in the Agora for browsing, and we're a part of the Agora C. So we have the Hiraya Foresight booth, at the UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit, and around like 225 plus events, including this event that we have today, is scheduled for day two over the next 3 days. So again, the intent of this gathering this afternoon is for us to have a conversation and share our insights and perspectives as well as imaginings as to how we may be able to use and make sense of futures literacy in higher education. I've seen in the different Agora booths and in many of the plenaries, the role of higher education is seen as very critical and crucial in the advancement and promotion in the deepening of futures literacy, at different levels. And mostly, most of the efforts that we've seen in the past, it has always started, triggered by the academe. And today we are gathered to have a conversation about that and explore together through using the Hiraya Foresight lens, using, of course, in the context of frenetic thinking, that we explore futures literacy in higher education. Again, thank you very much. On behalf of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, I would like to welcome you in this afternoon's futures conversation.
Yes. Good afternoon to all. I'm Malu Rebolida, and I am privileged to be here in this fireside chat for today's UNESCO Summit to host the sharing and the discussion on the topic of futures thinking in higher education. So this afternoon, we have a panel of experts who will be chatting with us, conversing with us, and giving their own narratives. And we would like to invite you also to give your share of comments in the chat box. To start with, we are going to have first the sharing of our keynote speaker. And I'd like to make a brief introduction of the president of Northwestern University, located in Ilocos Norte, Lawag City, Ilocos Norte. So here I would like to say that our attorney, Ferdinand Nicolas, completed his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, and his Juris Doctor from the Arellano University School of Law, and he completed and was admitted to the bar in 2005. Attorney Nicolas began his career in educational management in 2005 as the Corporate Planning Director of Northwestern University, and he rose from all of this positions, administrative positions in the university. He doubled up as legal officer and became vice president for administration in 2007. And in 2014, he was appointed as university president. He holds this position to this day. At the same time, he is also a member of the Faculty of Instruction of the College of Law and the College of Arts and Sciences of Northwestern University. Aside from that, he's also chairman of the Ilocos Consortium for Industry, Energy, and Emerging Technology Research and Development, and chairman of the Multi-Sectoral Governance Council of the Mariano Marcos Memorial Hospital and Medical Center. And I'd also like to highlight that Attorney Nicolas is a volunteer as a Philippine Navy reservist with the rank of Lieutenant Junior grade, and he is head of the Ilocos cluster of the Elim communities, which is a family of Catholic communities dedicated to the Lord's service. So here we have the full scale of Attorney Nicolas' personal life, his Navy work, his academic work, and as president of the Northwestern University, he will share with us his thoughts on how futures thinking can be an influence in higher education institutions. So colleagues and co-learners, co-sharers in knowledge, please welcome Attorney Ferdinand Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rebolida. And it is my honor. I'm terribly humbled by the opportunity to share some thoughts on how we can further expand futures literacy in higher education. So I'd like my slide to be, my presentation to be front and center, please. Okay, so the presentation that we will have for this afternoon is entitled Teaching Futures in the Philippine Higher Education Setting. So let's start with a story. Next slide, please. This is an allegory that I've made for this particular presentation. So yes, next slide. So Jose Bautista, which is actually the most common Filipino name, not really Juan de la Cruz, but it's Jose Bautista, is a fisherman. He grew up next to the sea and only completed a third grade elementary education. Fishing is the only work he knows, learning it from his father. Please, there, okay. As a teenager, he would go fishing with his father and they would normally be able to fill their nets. As the years went by, the village grew and more fishermen were casting their nets in the sea. As Jose explored further away from shore to avoid competition, he also encountered huge commercial fishing vessels now sharing the waters. The catch has been getting smaller in the past few years, and the competition with other fishermen driving the prices of fish lower. He struggles to feed his family of 5, while news of new environmental regulations threaten to limit the months of fishing that can be done in a year. So, as we speak of futures, how can we convince Jose that his work that hardly feeds his family today needs to stop in order to prevent the collapse of the fish population tomorrow? How can we tell Jose to deal with problems in the future if the perceived solution leads to the hunger of his family today? Of course, this is just an allegory, but it points to one of the main challenges posing the importance of the future, which is the urgency of the present. Despite its steady economic growth, the Philippines is still very much a developing country with 1/5 of its population living below the poverty line, based on a 2018 report of the Asian Development Bank. That is roughly around 21,340,000 individuals struggling to meet their daily needs. A substantial portion of that live in extreme poverty, subsisting on only $1.25 a day. As we go into the bureaucracy, we have government agencies struggling to provide public services on limited budgets. This is further exacerbated by natural calamities that seem to visit the country with much more frequency than before. Case in point, in this year alone, apart from the pandemic, the Philippines has had a volcanic eruption in January, displacing 300,000 persons and causing 60.1 million US dollars worth of damage to crops, covering 2,722 hectares. Just recently, also, the country again suffered massive floods after having been visited by two typhoons. One particular town, neighboring Ilocos Norte, Alcala in Cagayan Valley, suffered floods in 24 of its 25 barangays. Only the municipal center was spared from floods, and in some parts of the town, the flood reached 3 stories high. Thinking of the future can be perceived as a luxury for those who enjoy security in the present. To use another analogy, how can a chef think of his menu for tomorrow when he is putting out fires in the kitchen today? But perhaps it may be because some equate futures with daydreaming, what we could enjoy in the future instead of dealing with the pressing needs which are evident today. But we cannot conceive the future without being informed by the present. So going into our topic, here are a few ideas on how we can more effectively spread futures literacy in a higher education setting. Instruction, of course, is the most obvious approach. On the part of Northwestern University, we have already included futures thinking in various curricular offerings. But of course, there is a tendency to treat curricular offerings as just another requirement a student has to accomplish in order to complete his degree. Better consideration and learning can be achieved through quality instruction. However, particularly in the application of futures concepts in case studies, class projects, and theses. We can also enhance instruction through the organizing of futures camps as part of student development. We can take students outside of the classroom setting where they can learn futures thinking in a fun way through games and simulations, leading to a more serious consideration of the futures we can create for ourselves. Might I add here that Northwestern University has also had the privilege of having futures methodologies in crafting its 5-year plan back in 2014. And to this day, we're still striving for it. We're still working for it. Nevertheless, the preferred future of an autonomous world-class university still resonates in the hearts and minds of Northwesternians. Another pillar of higher education is community extension, where students are called upon to apply the skills and knowledge they have learned in the classroom for the benefit of a local community or an adopted barangay. Traditionally, needs assessments are conducted by extension coordinators in order to identify the specific projects that the students can conduct in order to enhance the living conditions of the community. By applying futures thinking methodologies, students will need to take into consideration not only the perceived needs of the community, but their narratives, their culture, their environment, among others. With the involvement of stakeholders and armed with data analyses, extension activities may become more instrumental in creating lasting change in adopted communities. Part of the extension services of Northwestern University is being an accredited cooperative training provider. We have been tapped by the Cooperative Development Authority as well as many local cooperatives in this regard. Apart from learning the knowledge and skills for governance and management, cooperatives can benefit from the deeper narratives and ownership of the organization towards the goals and objectives they set for themselves in the future. One of the persuasive factors of futures thinking to my mind is the incorporation of culture and mindsets into the equation of planning for the future. In a recent video I watched, Professor Sohail Inayatullah said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." That is, unless we go to the hearts and minds of people, unless we change the stories that they tell themselves, their behavior will not conform to whatever strategy we come up with, and we will find ourselves encountering the same problems over and over, or worse, being less prepared for what the future holds. So going back to the governance and management of cooperatives, instead of just instead of just giving, let's say, farmers a list of things to do in order to keep production up and everyone accountable, which they are all pretty much unfamiliar with, the shared vision of the future can provide greater motivation towards attaining that future while dealing with the nitty-gritty chores of management. Of course, another pillar of higher education is research. And in this regard, futures thinking methodologies can be readily applied. Northwestern University has just signed up a memorandum of agreement with the provincial government of Ilocos Norte as its research partner. And we can take this opportunity to introduce futures methodologies to create policy with collaboration and input from all stakeholders. Another feature of futures thinking methodologies is the distribution of power among all stakeholders, enabling the citizenry to participate more meaningfully in governance. And we can expand this collaboration to apply to different sectors and industries: education, banking and finance, business and entrepreneurship, tourism, even going into the futures of indigenous crafts and products. Now, jumping from yesterday's live event, I hope that some of us here were able to join us yesterday. Nevertheless, of course, the video is still up, so you can watch the democratization of futures thinking. Jumping from that event, we were able to come up with a few more ideas for the spreading of futures thinking in educational institutions by calling upon the government educational agencies, Department of Education, the Commission on Higher Education, well represented here, and TESDA to mandate a Futures Day to be celebrated by schools nationwide. This celebration can include futures literacy seminars and workshops, but also essay writing, poster making, songwriting, and other creative events that can communicate to the hearts and minds of people. For Northwestern University, I'm thinking even now to include futures events for our Foundation Day next year, come January. This is in order to kickstart the futures literacy campaign among the students in general. Perhaps we can even modify the NSTP syllabus in order to include futures as one of the topics. Finally, this one. I've been toying with this concept in preparation for this event. I actually asked Professor Cruz if futures methodologies have been applied on a personal level. I am thinking of the application of futures thinking as a self-help tool, perhaps in the guidance program of schools. If we consider career planning as one particular subject matter, students can learn to integrate data, information about themselves and their resources, with their preferences, which activities engage them and make them fully alive, with consultation from stakeholders, which may include their parents, their siblings, maybe their boyfriend or girlfriend, or their neighbors, in order to craft the different scenarios for their personal future. There will definitely be some transfer of knowledge required, whether the guidance counselor learns futures thinking methodologies and incorporate them in counseling methods, or it can be a collaboration between a futurist and a guidance counselor to come up with a guidance tool. Either way, the student is exposed to futures thinking and would be able to apply the concepts in a more concrete and personal way in order to forge ahead into the future. Underlying all these possible projects is having a pool of futurists sharing their knowledge and skills and replicating them, which is the place where we all must begin. So, going back to our allegory, how do we solve the problem of Jose? I believe that we can provide for him alternative solutions to his problem. He has to diversify, which is my last slide there. Um, I was trying to find pictures, different alternatives that Jose can apply in order to solve his problem. Now that I was trying to get different scenarios for him. Now that I look at the pictures it seems to also coincide with the different scenarios that he may encounter in the future. At the lower left can be the future if he continues on doing what he has always done, just fishing, just scraping along to make a living. Okay, and then on the upper right corner, perhaps that is a preferred future where he now uses his skills for tourism, bringing tourists to see the butanding or the whale shark. I'm not sure if the upper left is an outlier or a preferred future. I don't know. Maybe we can ask Jose. Okay, and the lower right can be him joining with commercial fishing, thus making a more secure future for him and his family. This is just an allegory, but the moral of the story is to create alternative futures, paving the way to a more resilient and therefore a more secure tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening, and Hiraya Manawari.
Attorney Nicolas, for giving us some highlights of what's happening, what's going on at Northwestern University, and for giving us something very concrete, very, very real, the dilemma that we have to face when we have farmers, we have fisher folk, we have people at all levels of our economic scenario currently that have to be shifted to a preferred future. And given the role of higher education, our keynote speaker here has highlighted the 3 dimensions of instruction, public service extension, and research, by which they have already initiated some interventions to lead to a preferred future. And he gave us some highlights of what can possibly be done. So I would like to introduce the members of our chat group today, and we can do some interaction. Perhaps I will do their interaction one at a time when they have their first round of sharing their views, and then we can have a more free-flowing discussion. Today we have Dr. Alex Brillantes. We have Regional Director for Region 5, Director Freddie Bernal. We also have Dr. Sally Hoax from Australia. We have Dr. Dennis Morgan. We have Professor Sherman Cruz, who said that he was in the panel yesterday, so he will be on the side, but I think we can also engage him in this chat group, and we will be awaiting the coming in of Dr. Tirso Ronquillo. So both Director Bernal and Dr. Alex Brillantes are in CHED, or at least in the case of Dr. Alex, he was with the CHED. Dr. Alex is also in the university, and Director Bernal has also been asked to be OIC of Catanduanes University. So I will give a brief introduction of our Regional Director, Bernal. Let me just find out some of the highlights that I have here for him. So I don't know if I should give the date when you graduated. They might start counting your age. But he finished his political science at the Catanduanes State University, which is in Bicol, and then he finished his MA and PhD in development education from the University of Santo Tomas on scholarship, and he went on to take other continuing education courses. So for his professional work in education, he was in the graduate school and at the University of Santo Tomas for Philippine Women's University, AMA University, and the Holy Angel University, where he also taught in the graduate school. And may I add, he was also affiliated with the Technological University of the Philippines and Benguet State University. He was teaching part-time at the Cebu Normal University and at the Cebu Technological University during his stint as Regional Director of CHED Regional Office 7. He has been with CHED for quite some time. Aside from being Director of Cordillera Administrative Region, he was also assigned to Region 5 and Region 7. And now that he's back in his hometown, Region 5, Bicol, and he also had a short stint as OIC of Catanduanes University. So he's both an academician and a practitioner and an administrator. And now that he's with CHED, perhaps you can give us a bit of enlightenment of how this futures thinking can cascade to other universities, aside from the fact that Northwestern University has already engaged in this initiative. Director Bernal, we'll have you on the floor.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. As Regional Director of the Commission on Higher Education, it would be very easy for me to convince all higher education institutions in Bicol region, both public and private, to have a mindset about futures thinking. It's very easy indeed. And in the Bicol region, we have the so-called Bicol Foundation for Higher Education that covers public and private higher education institutions that are well organized, and cooperating with each other, collaborating, complementing in many ways, and also helping each other. In fact, they meet regularly to discuss issues and concerns affecting them with in view of coming up with win-win solutions. So the Bicol Foundation for Higher Education, which is well organized, which I am the consultant, never lost focus that better access of students, higher quality education, and relevance in program offerings that will address the development needs of the region and specific geographical areas, as well as productive research and profound extension services to be enhanced through complementation and collaboration. Coming here, the macro perspective at the regional setting of higher education. And so we have our synergy such that we agree to concentrate on the niche that can be the niche of each school and develop flagship programs in the context of a regional development roadmap and in line with their vision, mission, and goals. So on this line, in principle, we agreed that for SOCs being heavily subsidized by the state, to venture more in offering programs that are capital intensive, highly specialized sciences, engineering and technology studies, agriculture and fisheries, and other relevant programs, and engage more in research and development. So we also encourage them to refrain from opening oversubscribed programs, though popular, that can be satisfactorily offered by private higher education institutions. We also mentioned to SOCs that they should play big brother role in extending assistance to local colleges, private higher education institutions within its geographical area, such as in research, mentoring, collaboration, even secondment of faculty members and experts in other capacitation and resource sharing modes. And for local colleges, we have a lot of that in the Bicol region, about 24. So as much as possible, focus more in offering post-secondary vocational technical programs as mandated in the Local Government Code of 1991, and to venture only in opening degree programs if they meet the following conditions: that the programs are actually needed by the town, city, or province according to the comprehensive development plan and program of the LGU, and that the programs can be quality assured. And for private higher education institutions, put primacy to quality and relevant education and to educational services and welfare of students. Moreover, to avoid duplication of programs satisfactorily offered by other higher education institutions, particularly that the other private higher education institutions in the service area, so as not to negatively affect the viability of operation and quality of educational services. Instead, establish flagship programs as their niche and continuously pursue scholarship, research, innovation, and competitiveness of graduates. May I also inform you that at the regional perspective, this COVID pandemic brought drastic changes in the teaching learning modalities in all levels of education. Higher education institutions are forced to implement the flexible learning modality by CHED using the online and offline platforms as face-to-face contact between the teachers and students. The classroom setting is strictly prohibited. The problem was that most of higher education institutions in the Bicol region have either limited knowledge or no ideas at all about flexible learning. So in response, the Bicol Foundation for Higher Education formed the Bicol Consortium, consists of leading higher education institutions with experience or adept in flexible learning modalities to teach or train trainers, senior faculty members in every higher education institution in the region before the first semester of the present school year. With the funding amounting to 28.8 million from CHED, spearheaded by Ateneo de Naga University, we implemented the project dubbed Fast Tracking the Retooling of Higher Education Institutions in Region 5 for Education 4.0. Thus, as CHED Director in the Bicol region, I am very confident that all our higher education institutions at present are capable to implement flexible learning modalities. So also, we realize that flexible learning using the online and offline platform is here to stay. It can facilitate accessibility, quality higher education regardless of distance, the server or education provider, whether there are calamities such as COVID pandemic or not, and regardless of the life circumstances of the learners. So, in line with the futures of literacy in higher education, aside from mastering the nuances of flexible learning, higher education institutions in Bicol region are encouraged to develop their own smart campuses. So I'm happy to inform you that as part of the package under the Bayanihan to Recover One as Act, CHED has 3 billion worth of funds to help SUCs develop their smart campuses, requesting proposal not more than 25 million to start with. And all our 9 SUCs in the region submitted their proposal. There are 3 phases, namely readiness, determination, and assessment of the school for smart campus, campus digital networking, and digital transformation. So the future is on, for us, is more on smart campus, more on the learning management system, flexible learning, which the Bicol region, the Commission on Higher Education, in collaboration with the Bicol Foundation for Higher Education, is conceptualizing an ambitious project to establish information superhighway through Smart Campus Establishment Program. We call this Bicol Connect. This involves enhancement of connectivity of all higher education institutions in Bicol, development of learning management system for Bicol, and enhancement of the regional online management portal, among others. So recently, aside from the COVID pandemic, the vulnerability of higher education institutions came to light because of the series of natural calamities that happened. From October 13 to November 11, Bicol region was hit by a total of 6 tropical depressions, tropical storms, typhoons, and super typhoon, which caused landslides, flooding, and lahar flows, and brought about untold devastations and sufferings. In infrastructure alone, the cost of damages in some schools due to Super Typhoon Rolly is estimated to be hundreds of millions. It is expected that this kind of natural calamities due to climate change would be the new normal in the Bicol. As such, in Catanduanes, province in Bicol, where I am the designated OIC president at present, the new building are designed to withstand typhoon signal number 5, or the typhoon which has speed of more than 220 kilometers per hour. Likewise, due to intermittent power and water supply shortage and environmental concerns, we are developing our university to be truly green, meaning we will harness the solar power for our electricity, harvest storm water, biogas fuel for from our livestock, plant more trees, raise consciousness to recycle garbage, and less wastage in power consumption, among others. So admittedly, all these efforts for the present and future of higher education in the Bicol region are being done without the conscious, deliberate, and organized methodologies of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, the Center for Engaged Foresight, or the intensive program offered in the graduate school for public development management of the Development Academy of the Philippines about future thinking. So to get involvement of all higher education institutions, the Bicol region, the theme of the Bicol Foundation for Higher Education, with the leadership of the Commission on Higher Education, the theme for the Media Conference 2020 on December 21, 22, via Zoom and FB Live, is future-proofing Bicol higher education institution amidst COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. So what I'm saying here is beyond the programs and projects specific to the school should be ready for the future. And as we can see, it should be on smart campus, flexible learning, green university, and of course, complementation and collaboration between among higher education institutions with the end view of looking at the niche where they can fit in, establishing flagship programs so that instead of cutthroat competition between and among them, they can help each other. But really, I appreciate very much the sharing of President Nicolas about their programs in their university. So thank you. That's my initial thought.
R.D. Bernal. I think that R.D. Bernal has been able to give us some broad strokes of what could possibly be a preferred future at the regional level. No? Because at the regional level, you have more than one school. So you have several, and that pertains to Bicol. But I think you cited areas in a preferred future for the Bicol region that might also be applicable to other regions. Like you mentioned that there's need for capacitation of local colleges, so even secondary schools, to get them oriented to a better future, to futures thinking. And you highlighted the importance of information highways, green technology, and even you use the word future-proofing the Bicol region, and for each of the schools to have flagship programs. I'm wondering if I could get a little bit of a feedback here from our keynote speaker, President Nicolas, because President Nicolas was talking about diversification and the 3 pillars of education in Lawag pertaining to Northwestern University. So that's one school. How would you imagine a future like this in the same way as Bicol region, but pertaining to Lawag in the context of the region in which Lawag and Ilocos Norte are located? Is President Nicolas
Yes.
here?
Yes, I'm here.
Maybe a bit of
I'm here.
of a response kasi
Yes,
di ba
yes.
local, and they said local universities ganyan, so regional.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
we can connect and see how that can be regionalized also in Ilocos.
For the most part, I would like to solicit Dr. Bernal's support for a Futures Day for the Bicol region, diba? For all the SUCs and PHEIs over there, in order to get the mindset of our students in looking at the futures, not just one thing that they they aspire for, but to have alternative futures so that they have a more resilient outlook, a more resilient plan in whichever alternate future actually becomes reality. One thing I think he touched on is the a culture that still has to be dealt with is the interaction, the very nice interaction between SUCs, state universities and colleges, and private higher education institutions, so that there is more collaborations and synergy instead of competition, because that's still something, we're all trying to do our best in our own institutions. And of course, sometimes when the interests clash, then it becomes unproductive. There's some waste, and even so perhaps to create that atmosphere to have a joint preferred future for the region, or even just for the province, let's say. But yes, even for the region, so that we have particular niches, which Dr. Bernal also mentioned, so that we know our place and we know where we can succeed, and we know where we can put in our efforts, especially for private higher education institutions with limited limited resources. Of course, Ched has been very helpful. We're thankful that we're a deregulated university, so we do get some help. And of course, the TES, the tertiary education subsidy, which is very welcome. So uh, those efforts do truly pave the way for a more united, concerted effort to dealing with the challenges of the future.
Yeah. So here, I think what our two chat members are saying is that there is the localized within a particular university, the efforts to be able to do futures thinking and move the university towards something in the future along the lines that you have mentioned. But hindi pwedeng isang university, we just cannot have one local university. It has to be collaborative so that there's connectivity. We don't go in silos, and the whole region gets together towards envisioning a preferred future where we really are interconnected. So you have Ilocos and the regional area of Ilocos Lawag, and then you also have Bicol, where RD is in charge, and also where he was OIC for Catanduanes State University. So your experience is really getting us on board to see the importance of collaboration. We have Professor Dennis Morgan here from Hankook University of South Korea, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts on our local, national, and global relationships, where we try to connect the local with the global patterns in higher education. Dr. Dennis Morgan has been with us, and maybe I can just highlight here that he has been engaged in globalization and American studies, intercultural communication, and especially the introduction of global future studies. So perhaps we can have a few minutes with you to share with us how we can also connect to a global arena, especially because some things that were mentioned, including grassroots, community participation, information highways, and especially for the intervention in the environment, a better future towards green technology, as what was highlighted in the sharing of our first two speakers. Prof. Dennis?
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. And I'm a retired professor now. I taught Introduction to Global Future Studies course for several years at the Hankook University of Foreign Studies. And I do have a degree in future studies from several decades ago, actually. But currently, I'm, like I said, I'm retired, but I live in the Philippines, and I'm working with my children are homeschooling, and I'm working on gardening, and but I also do, I'm currently active in preparing for a book that I'm working on called The End of the Future. and New Man, Pathways of Dissent, and the Emergence of the 21st Century Mind. Part of it's a response to Francis Fukuyama's book, End of History and the Last Man. So I was encouraged by, I think, is it President Nicholas? His initial presentation. I think that, you know, as far as his example, I said the antidote, right? That I think that part of the solution, at least to me, is to move towards sustainability. I don't think we have much choice, really, as humanity as a whole. You know, our future will be sustainable, or we won't have one. Basically, that's what it comes down to. And so, but sustainability is not just individual project. So, you know, we can't just focus on individual futures, but people have to be connected to each other. They need a strong support system. And it does require education. It requires a new mind, a new kind of thinking and we have to look at the global, historical, and even evolutionary drivers that are converging at this very point upon humankind. And I think this has even been brought out even more so with the COVID crisis. But people have to link together and help each other. They have to join in cooperatives. We have to move towards a sort of post-capitalist sort of society. That doesn't mean that there won't be market, but there has to be each country has to find its own way to blend in some elements of socialism and some elements of capitalism. So it's sort of socialism with a market economy, but one that's more interdependent, you know, where people, again, you know, people have to help each other to survive in the present, but also to develop an ethic for future generations. Because otherwise you're just in the same cycle over and over and over again. You keep repeating the same mistakes and you can't get out of this cycle. So people have to have the futures consciousness so they can get out of this cycle, so that future generations will have as much or better quality of life that we do. You know, and I think that's been the goal for sustainable society all the way back from 1992 in the Rio Summit. If some of you probably recall, I mean, those who have some background in future studies, you realize it's a very monumental declaration that was made. And the Philippines was one of the first countries that took on that goal of sustainability. So anyway, that's pretty much just off the top of my head, my thoughts, you know, in response, especially to President Nicholas's wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Morgan. I think you gave us a little bit of a disruptive idea there by giving us the idea that we must get out of the cycle. So if we need to do future thinking, we also need to have some parameters. What will drive the future? What will be our assumptions about the preferred future? And if our assumptions are still the assumptions of the present generation or the assumptions of the past generations, it might not really push us to a better future, because we will just be repeating the same thing, you know? So you have hogwash water coming in and getting out. So we need to get out of that cycle. So if higher education is to move forward in the areas of instruction, extension, and public service, such as in cooperatives, and even when we talk about research, we need to be a bit disruptive. And I think President Nicolas was talking about diversification. You have to diversify maybe as a way of getting out of the present that's really been the rut that we are in, and not in silos, no, but getting on. And you mentioned about the communities being involved, no? Not just students, not just people who go to universities, but fishermen, fisherfolk, people at the grassroots in the informal economy. And I'd just like to highlight what you said, that we've really been at the future of sustainable development, having sustainable societies. No, we went out of Millennium Development Goals with unfinished goals, and we're now pushing it to Sustainable Development Goals. So what is going to happen there? I think you said something a little bit disruptive in my perspective when you said that maybe we should think about socialism with market economy, or post-capitalism, so that we will really be able to have a much more inclusive economy, and much more inclusive and sustainable development. So those are the drivers at the global level to which we can rethink the assumptions at the regional and also at the individual university or higher educational institutional level. Thank you very much, Professor Morgan. I'd like to call on our Dr. Alex Brillantes. Dr. Alex Brillantes was formerly a commissioner of CHED. CHED is the Commissioner for Higher Education in the Philippines that covers all the public and private tertiary education. He was also Dean of the National College of Public Administration, and he's a pillar of many associations in the country, including the Philippine Society for Public Administration, the Asian Association for Public Administration, even this Futures Thinking, and he is on board many councils, board of trustees, and fellow of many research institutions. So he's really a thought leader, being able to push the dynamics of development and public administration thinking and the praxis in the country. So I'd like to call on our colleague here, Dr. Alex Brillantes, for your views, maybe CHED-wise or nationwide. And he's also in the local government discourse, being very active in the discourses of federalism, decentralization, and devolution. So maybe, Dr. Alex, you can give us that vertical and horizontal links for futures thinking. Dr. Alex?
Thank you, Dr. Malu, for that kind introduction. But I'd like to thank President Ferdi, kababayan ko po, because I'm also from the north, from Lawag. It's but anyway, that's a very, very important point in my discussion, because indeed Northwestern University is one of the leading universities in the north. Okay. Number two, I'm very happy to see my good friend, one of my best friends in CHED, Director Bernal. It's so good to see you, sir. But of course, our community of futures, all of us, it's a community of people who have been thinking about this particular problem of futures thinking, and of course, led no less by Sherman, indeed one of the leading futures thinking scholars in the Philippines, together with Dr. Lisan. But let me say, sir, that I enjoyed your presentation, and I'll just take about five or 10 minutes. It's really the fact that what you said, you talk about us going back to the classic education, right? We do teaching, research, extension, right? And the whole question for me is, how relevant have we been? Okay, how relevant have we been? For when I was chair of a number of universities, I think about 24 universities here in the Philippines, that's one question I always ask: tayo ba ay naglalanding? And to a certain extent, this point was, I guess, reaffirmed. We participated in a very, very recent National Research Council forum, I think just last week. The whole question that's bothering us is, are our researches being utilized by policymakers? How relevant are we? I think that's very, very important when we're talking futures thinking. Critical thinking, in fact, if you ask me, self-criticism is very, very important. We cannot continue kidding ourselves if we think we are that. Okay? So I'm glad that President Nicolas mentioned that. And you did talk about the importance of the Futures Day, which I think is a great idea. And equally important, I think, what our colleague Dennis mentioned, no, about the global thinking and also local thinking. No, one thing that we always talk about here is really, hey, we have to. It's an old slogan, thinking global, acting local, glocalizing. We cannot be irrelevant. We have to talk about the world of Juan Bautista. But hey, what is Juan Bautista in relation to the globe? And I think I'm going to in a while. No, you cannot detach that. Hence, this whole notion of thinking globalization, I think is very, very important. And I think our colleague, Professor Dennis, also suggested that. But equally important, we in the universities have to, as I mentioned earlier, continue being relevant. And one thing that I've talked about ever since I was in CHED and even in UP and even now is the fact that it's very important that the university be grounded. There's this thing called town and gown. I learned this in the US, of course. Town and gown, meaning to say, we in the university, when we graduate, we wear our gown. We go there, we do researches, that's fine. But hey, are our researches being used by the town? Question, the ultimate test, among the tests, of course, is really are we able to convince, or are we able to do policy? That's very, very important, because that is what we can contribute. We have the evidence, we have the knowledge, we have the science, and sometimes you have policies here that are ungrounded. We have to assert our presence in this whole policy making process. Okay, but let me also talk about another thing that I think is very, very important. All of these are all can be embedded. I mentioned this to the, Professor Sherman before about. I happen to be from the discipline of public administration. It can be embedded, if you may, in the field called policy analysis, but not only that, okay? Because policy analysis talks about the importance of addressing alternatives. Alternatives for what? And our job is to provide alternatives to our policymakers. At one point, I happened to be on the other side. I was, as mentioned, kindly mentioned by Dr. Malu, I was on the commissioners. It's like a deputy minister, you know. But even before we make the decisions, we have to have alternatives. We have to have alternatives. And now let me proceed with by talking about the quote unquote elephant in the room. You know what? I happened to attend a forum with, I don't know, some of you know him, is Noam Chomsky. Noam is about 92 years old, a very brilliant fellow, and easily one of the leading thinkers of the world. Just about 2 days ago, and I read Noam when I was a graduate school back in Hawaii. And it's very, very important that, you know, this whole notion of looking at the future, etc., is just something that has been part of the discourse, but not mainstream, perhaps not yet mainstream, at least for us in the academe. Hence, Dr. Nicolas, you're talking about it having a Futures Day, a Futures Literacy track, etc., etc. But Noam has been talking about, he's a social critic, right? Noam has been doing some reflections. He's already 92 years old. And he said, you know what, one of the things we should consider, it's hard to think about it, but we should consider it. Because of the pandemic, we've begun to think about the extinction of mankind. We've begun to think about the extinction of mankind. But that's not new, as Noam mentioned, because even before, we had the threat of nuclear war, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how many minutes to midnight have we been? We have been to 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 2 minutes, and we were the threat of nuclear disaster, which could have spelled the global extinction. That's one threat. Number two, we're talking about, and this is what Sir President Ferdinand mentioned, the environmental catastrophe that's upon us. It's right there. The ice caps are melting. Juan Bautista has nothing to catch. He might be drowned someday. We have countries that will be underwater. And we think of, and I think that's something that we should all be aware of. Possible extinction, nuclear, the global climate change, and of course, what we've seen, how close it has been, no? This pandemic that's going on. Question. Oh, and the third part, let me mention, even as we're talking about that, and I'll shut up in one, even as we've been talking about that, this whole deterioration of democratic structures all over the world. Democratic structures all over are going down. Dictatorships left and right, populism left and right, including other countries, including the United States. And that is quoting Noam. Because if you look at the US now, people are beginning to wonder what's going on. And the Philippines itself has been pattern of that. So I think we in the academic community, if you may, have to continue thinking the unthinkable. I think the unthinkable really, or people who just choose not to look at that because it's not comforting. And you talk about the importance of disruptive thinking. Yes, we should do that. But what's our role as academics, as thinkers, if you may, without being presumptuous, is really to look at this. How will it be? And of course, you and I know are familiar with this thing called equity. We are not thinking of ourselves. We should be thinking of the next generation, if there will be a next generation. I have 2 grandchildren, and I sometimes feel so sad when I think about the pandemic, when I think about this nuclear disaster. We should think about that. And when I think about climate change, question, how do we position ourselves? And that is where perhaps our collective advocacy would come in terms of providing said evidence. And that is where I think we, educators, and even higher education, Sir Ferdy, you know, our researchers perhaps should I'm not saying this can be part of our continuing research agenda to be relevant. Otherwise, we'll get our nice researchers, be published in Scopus Journal, be cited, you know, you say you have been cited 2,000 times. Hey, what matters is, are we relevant to Juan Bautista? So with that, I'd like to thank President Nicolas for that. So I think this is very, very important. We continue pushing the envelope, questioning, asking the hard questions, asking disruptive questions, as Dr. Malu mentioned, and that is our job. Because at the end of the day, we have to be relevant not only to ourselves, but hey, to our children, to my 2 grandchildren. So thank you,
Yes.
President Ferdy, for initiating this discussion. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you to the discussions that have already rolled on since we started at 2:10 this afternoon. And I think that as we move on, we're beginning to see at this point, at the point of the discussion of Dr. Alex, that the parameters to which futures thinking should be directed are already being laid down a bit here in our discussion. Meaning to say that if we do futures thinking, if we use the methodologies of future thinking, we still have a remaining question. What will be the content of that preferred future? How do we assess or how do we evaluate the very nature of that future? Is it really better or is it worse off? And I think from the discussion so far, we're seeing that there are new things that we should embark on. And these new things that should be the focus of teaching, research, education, everything that is being done in educational institutions should take a look at what's going on, how will life be from now on? What kind of a situation do we want? Number one, the situation of our climate. Sabi na nga, may climate change. The situation of our environment. So our keynote speaker mentioned the importance of green technology. And from my experience over the past 10 or 15 years, it has been very, very difficult to even launch the idea of renewable energy or green technology because the economic setup, the business, the marketing setup is not yet shifted to be conducive to marketing, sale, buying and selling the economy of renewable energies or the use of green technology. Or even like, for example, the question of our keynote speaker, what will the fisherman do if you tell him to stop fishing? So where will you, towards what ends, towards what direction should we move our people from where we are right now to the future? And exactly what types of methodologies will be useful for us at the university level. Director Bernal mentioned the use of information technology, how important that will be for us to have interconnectivity. And even that, perhaps we can say that our higher educational institutions may not really be so equipped even for information technology. So these are the new things that we need to embark on. We have other speakers that we have invited, but I'm not sure that they're in. So maybe we can open the floor for the sharing of our other co-sharers, co-participants, co-futurists in this platform. I'm not sure if Dr. Tirsa Ronquillo is already in. Then we also have Mr. Emmanuel de Guia. If they're not yet into our platform, maybe we can ask Dr. Sally, folks, to come in and share with us your thoughts on and move our discussion forward. Dr. Sally? Dr. Sally is from Australia, and we've had Dr. Sally with the DAP Graduate School for Development and Public Management, and she has been with us in some futures thinking forums in the past months. Dr. Sally?
Thank you, Maria. And I had the opportunity of contributing to a Senate hearing.
Yes.
Women invited me to, which was just a wonderful opportunity to see how central these themes are becoming in the Philippines. On the chat, I've just randomly identified 2 or 3 thoughts that are, for me, coming through from the discussions. One is, and I work in a university, but I have a range of other roles on boards of organisations, international organisations. So I'm interested in very much the connection between what we do as institutions and what happens as a result of our work in teaching, in research and in community service. And so I've just put up 3 thoughts. One is to what extent it might be possible for, and I'm not quite sure what level it's appropriate, but possibly national, certainly regional, with futures literacy becoming a core KPI for every tertiary graduate and not just those who might be studying futures methods and sciences. The second thought was the importance of institutionalizing both disciplinary learning and transdisciplinary learning so that we can actually communicate between each other and possibly translate that to the real world as well, so that we move out of our single disciplines, whether it's in healthcare or accounting or whatever it might be. And the third random idea I had was around, and this was responding to a few speakers, systematically hardwiring connections between institutions and communities. And of course, there are dozens of examples where, and some have been mentioned already, about community service, you know, getting students out of the institution and working in communities. But often it's an add-on, or it's something inspired by particular educators. But I'm interested in, again, how we get this tipping point, really, of hardwiring these connections between institutions and communities, and where we get a systematic and reliable approach to institutions working in service to their communities very directly, and of course as a society more generally. So Maria, just some really top of the reactions to some of the wonderful presentations so far.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sally. I think you emphasized the importance of community service, of really linking the university to the communities around them with the people, and getting the students, as they learn higher education, to still be in touch with what's going on the ground. So we do not become too ivory tower. We don't become too academically highfalutin in our words, in our thinking, but we are still able to see what is practical, what is concrete, what is visible, and what is really real that's going on the ground. And that's a very important process that you are saying. And I think I'd like to highlight that the process should have content, and in terms of content, where do we drive them to? Towards what? Towards change in their livelihood, change in the way they treat the environment, simple behaviors, maybe like not throwing trash in the area. Those small things that can really do a lot for the sustainable development goal with pertinence to the environment. And then also about livelihood, community service that will be addressed at a sustainable development goal towards improving the lives of people through means of livelihood that universities can offer. So I have some ideas coming from the chat, and maybe we can also ask our panel to make their reaction. They are inclined to agree about a Futures Day and a Futures Festival, and how about doing it on the birthday of Jose Rizal? Maybe our panelists can say something about the localization of futures thinking by highlighting Dr. Rizal. Any comments from our panel on that? Where can we infuse the process of bringing down futures thinking in the consciousness of the people, not necessarily within the confines of the university, but the university will go out of its walls to bring futures thinking right there in the streets, in the communities, in the everyday lives. Maybe you can share your thoughts about, I'm reminded of my own discipline in political science. We say everyday politics, no? And maybe we can also say everyday futures thinking. Maybe you can say something about this. Any of the members of our panel?
Dr.
Yes, Attorney Nicolas.
This was actually born out of the conversation yesterday when one of the panelists actually mentioned the use of culture, the use of song and creative arts in order to communicate the narrative that we can all go, be united in. That's why from that, we were thinking of having a Futures Day where we think of of course we can only see the future from the lens of today. So, but really to look for and to look forward and plan for our descendants, as Dr. Brillantes said, for our children, grandchildren, to be a benevolent ancestor. I think that was one of the things that was spoken about. Yes, definitely. In terms of policy formation, there is the very rigorous academic side of that. But one of the things that really draws me to futures thinking is the use of futures, because is the use of culture, because whatever you think of from the top and impose towards the bottom will always find some resistance, and it may not provide a good fit, and therefore whatever strategy you may employ might not bear the expected fruit. And that's why I would like to touch on what Dr. Sally also mentioned about community extension, that the use of futures thinking concepts, particularly the involvement of the stakeholders of the community, learning their culture, learning their behavior, and also projecting, helping them project for themselves their preferred future, can bring together all these efforts in order to help them in a particular context. I think you mentioned also yesterday, Dr. Malu, in terms of resiliency to natural calamities or whatever issues that a particular community has, and therefore from there create a vision of a preferred future, but also considering the different futures, alternate futures that they may encounter, and plan for those, anticipate those, so that the community itself can be resilient to the identified risks that they encounter. So that's how, you know, I was raised in a Catholic school. They would bring us to payatas and to to experience the community, precisely for that, precisely for empathy, precisely to see at least a glimpse of what they are experiencing, and from there be able to work with the community, and something that they can take on and continue even after the help of the higher education institution has already expired. So ownership, synergy, bringing all the stakeholders, interested parties together in order to come up with solutions to the problems that we face.
Thank you very much, President Nicolas. For the remaining minutes that we have for this fireside chat, I'm thinking that perhaps you can ask those that are present in our panel the question of how prepared is CHED, our National Commission for Higher Education, the regions, and the higher education institutions to undertake futures thinking within the university, because if the university will be the agency that will bring out futures thinking in the communities, then the preparation perhaps should start from inside. I was hoping that we could have Dr. Tirso Ronquillo with us, because he's president of PASUC, and this is the organization of different universities. But I think perhaps Dr. Alex might want to give us an idea of PASUC and how the schools, the institutions there can be agents of future thinking. And also R.D. Bernal, how do you assess the regional CHEDs and the national CHED, its readiness to be able to embark on future thinking and leading the rest of the institutions all over the country towards this process?
I'll defer to, ikaw naman, Freddy, ikaw muna pare.
Okay. I think higher education institutions are open to ideas. And this is a bright ideas. These are bright ideas on futures thinking that they should imbibe, because education really is not for the present, but for the future, particularly that we are producing students. And so it's not only future proofing higher education institutions against all these elements that might impinge on their very survival and their competitiveness. But also, of course, looking at the result of education, looking at the futures of their students and how they can possibly work productively in the society. So I believe with the leadership of the Commission on Higher Education, by drumbeating these futures thinking ideas, then most, if not all, of higher education institutions will join in this kind of undertaking of ours.
Can I?
R.D. Bernal, perhaps Dr. Alex, you can give us an idea of PASUC or the different schools of public administration and other associations and even CHED. How prepared are we to get into this futures thinking process?
I think in terms of institutions, alam mo tayo sa Pilipinas, we just love to organize, and you and I know this, okay? That's why we have a lot of excellent institutions, a lot of excellent network, including, of course, PASUC, the Philippine Associated Schools, headed by Dr. Ronquillo, who, of course, an ASEAN engineer, one of the youngest presidents, very brilliant fellow. My point here, dear friends, is really, and as pointed by President Ferdy, is higher ed. Where are we? And I think CHED, when I was with CHED, of course, I'm not with CHED anymore, but my friends are there. I know Commissioner Popo is my good friend, and of course, Commissioner Darilan, who's also another good friend. And we talk about the fact that, you know, government as a quote-unquote regulator, or in this case, government as an enabler. I'd rather, no. So of course, regulator, as you know, sometimes there's so many schools sprouting up, and you know, government should come in. But I'd like to point out the fact that government can be an enabler, and certainly the proposal of President Ferdy, enabling the different institutions to really think about the future. But you know what, dear friends, we can, and this is in one sense the story of our lives. We can have so many laws, so many nice policies, so many circles, etc., etc. But if we don't internalize them, President Nicolas talked about the importance of changing mindset. It's very, very important. And this begins when we are collectively bothered. We should be collectively bothered about what's going on. But guess what? Humanity has been collectively bothered for the longest time. One of the first books that I read when I was much younger is The Club of Rome, Limits to Growth. Limits to Growth. This was in the 70s. And then, of course, all throughout time, you've had other books such as, I have some of them, Small is Beautiful, The Extreme Future, Mega Trends, etc., etc. Point, they're bothered because, hey, what's going on? And as we know, Professor Sherman reminds us many, many times that, hey, as future thinkers, I would not even call myself, it would be too presumptuous, but you know, we should be optimistic, but be collectively bothered. And when you are bothered, yet optimistic, you want to do something about it. That's why I talked about that we should be bothered by the deterioration of democracy. We should be bothered by the climate change. We should even be bothered by what's going on in terms of this pending nuclear crisis, which we're not thinking of right now. Okay, so my point, dear friends, is sure, this is very important, and CHED is really an enabler here. It can be an enabler. And as you're saying, Sir Ferdy, kapag ilalanding na po natin, as President Ferdy mentioned, and of course, as Freddy also mentioned, CHED can come up with the enabling mechanisms. You know, our specific CMOs, circulars, we organize some kind of technical working groups. You know, it can be done. But this should be done by people like yourselves who are saying, hey, can we push the envelope further and further? Because you and I know, and I'll shut up after this, you and I know that the university, Commission on Higher Education, the universities, marketplace of ideas, marketplace. We should entertain ideas from the extreme right to the extreme left. It's a universe. That's why we're in higher ed nga. And we're talking about pushing the envelope, and then together with that, identify alternatives, and then, you know, as Dr. Ferdy mentioned, maybe we can come up with the appropriate enabling mechanisms. But it begins with us as a humanity, as a citizenry, bothered by, hey, this is not acceptable, but we are optimistic. We want to do something about it. And these are some areas that we want to do something about. And it can be done by universities, PASUC itself. Thank you, Dr. Malu.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. Our chat here is saying that they really welcome your very passionate advocacy for the future and really being bothered collectively. Otherwise, we're not going to search for alternatives. And we have other comments here. Our sustainable future is really what we need to emphasize, no, the next generation. That's what also Professor Morgan has mentioned, the communities, as Professor Sally has been emphasizing. And here we also have a comment that futures literacy should be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. So while we're saying that maybe we're biased because our discipline is public administration, we want to house futures thinking in public ad discourses, but our comments here say that it should also be transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and connections between institutions, connections between disciplines, and connections between institutions. We also have a chat comment here that career planning can happen as early as senior high school. And our keynote speaker also mentioned about the need for personalized futures thinking, that it should be individual at the individual level also. Okay, and this collective disruption, this collective concern for what will happen in the future is so important because our generation of children and grandchildren are at stake. So we need to do something now at this level of our intergenerational whatever levels.
Equity.
Do intergenerational connectivity, because what is at stake is the future of our children and our grandchildren and so on down the line. So I think right
Very
now we have
quickly,
four
Malu.
generations.
Very quickly, because
Yes.
if you don't
Yes,
mind, I
Alex.
don't want to be presumptuous, but definitely it's interdisciplinary. The only reason that we mentioned, because
Yes.
public administration itself is interdisciplinary.
Yes,
That
yes,
is the
yes.
strength and weakness of public administration.
Yes.
It's very interdisciplinary. Sometimes, hey, where are we? So that's the point. So definitely we need the arts, we need social sciences.
Sciences.
Definitely. But the point there is we should be collectively bothered, but
Yes.
collectively optimistic, I think.
Yes.
And that's the
Yes.
mark of the future.
Yeah. That's a good point, because we can be collectively bothered. And then because of that, we're not thinking positively. We can also be collectively depressed. And we can also succumb to negativity. So we need to be collectively bothered, and we also need to be collectively optimistic. So I think this suggestion of having a one-day Futures Day, that we can think about the future of our children and our grandchildren, the future of the generations, can be a useful thing that maybe CHED can initiate, maybe interconnectivity with DepEd and with other offices. The Senate has been doing futures thinking, and we also have initiatives of futures thinking in Congress among some of our district representatives there. As we are about to be closing in the next few minutes, I'm thinking that maybe others may want to say something. If Dr. Sherman is here, Sheila, Dr. Lisan, and then we have others here. On the screen, we have Regine, Lovely Garcia, Faith Janelica, and others in the audience. Maybe you might want to open your video and give a few comments.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Yes,
Rebelida.
Sherman.
I was actually listening and wondering and curious and questioning at the same time when I was listening to all these brilliant thoughts and ideas on how we can proceed into embedding futures literacy and futures thinking in higher education. Specifically in learning, teaching, research, community extension, leadership, organization, students as well. And of course, we always ask the question about, okay, who is not in the room right now? Perhaps we need to include them soon. But I would just like to perhaps 2 points, 2 quick points that I have in mind. What we need to do at this point, perhaps, is we have to find ways to leapfrog. I think the narrative of catching up is pretty expensive, and it's or it's an orthodox approach to development, trying to catch up, like copycat, purchase used and default futures, benchmark and best practices, so forth and so on. There's a need for us to shift and transcend ourselves from beyond those narratives. But how might we be able to leapfrog ourselves from today into the future as far as futures literacy in higher education is concerned? I had a conversation with a colleague who is a consulting company in Poland. 2 days ago, I visited their Agora booth. They started their futures thinking consulting company in 2014 and 2015. When UNESCO devised the idea of futures literacy, they saw the opportunity, of futures literacy, as a framework and in the context of entrepreneurship. One thing that I learned was that, of course, what they had in mind is that you can compete with Rand Corporation, as far as futures thinking consulting is concerned. You can compete with Shell, so forth and so on. And then how might we situate ourselves to leapfrog at that level? One thing that he said was that, you have to collaborate because you can be a part of someone else's success. You can be a part of someone else's success. And talking about collaboration between state university and private institution, I think that is one worldview or metaphor that we can use. Because definitely, if we all agree, that we all believe, we agree, we believe in that idea or insight of that in order for us to leapfrog, we should be a part of someone else's success. And that would help us, think of new strategies by which we can all be collectively succeed in this effort. And another thing, which is of course, I love, I love listening to Dean Alex Brillantes even then, 10 years ago, at the PSPA conference, he's always been provocative, and I like the provocation that, of course, we need to be aware of, the larger forces at play, that can disable us or enable us in achieving the desired or preferred future vision. There are a lot of developments going on right now. Like Jerome Glenn recently, coined the idea to the United Nations for the UN to create a Department of Existential Risk and Threats. I believe, with the idea of Noam Chomsky when he said that, it is this time that we are now actually thinking about humanity's extinction. And there are risk and threats can kill people, and the emerging risk and threats can kill tomorrows. So that is the idea now. They placed that as a recommendation for the UN to create a Department of Existential Risk and Threats. And of course, not just the threats and risks that we need to think about, but also the wicked opportunities. I think really the task of futures thinking and foresight, if you try to map evidence-based futures or try to put a step a bit further and go into meta-analysis, which is what the Malaysian Ministry of Higher Education is doing right now. They've been trying to situate the future of higher education in different levels, from leadership to organization. Lahat po ng level tinitignan nila eh. Not just as an institution or a structure or an invention of learning, an institution of learning, but rather all the parts, that operates that makes university operate, today and in the future. So tinitignan nila lahat yung futures ng student, ng learner, ng professor, lahat ng aspeto nun. And then, of course, what they did was they started with mapping the future of higher education. How might the future of Malaysian education look like in the year 2050? So that's what they're doing right now. And they've been doing that actually in the last 20 years. In 2012, they've been doing Malaysian Future Higher Education in 2025. And apparently, it's all about imagining possibilities and finding ways to enable us to create meaningful strategy and implement them and execute. So it's a complex world out there, but of course, I agree that if we have a shared vision and that there is a collective act, that everything becomes possible. Thank you.
Very much, Professor Sherman. We have 80 participants. We had 83 a while ago, and then it went to 82, 81. We have 80 right now. So I'm hoping that each and every one of us here, the 80 of us at this point in time, will really be able to pull together the ideas expressed in our discussion and infuse that in whatever institution we are working with, or we are employed, or we can have a voice in whatever region that we are in. So we would like to get back to our keynote speaker and encourage Northwestern University to be a bastion or an example, an exemplar in futures thinking, and also would like to bring back all these ideas to our regional director Bernal, as you are at the vortex of work in region 5, and you have been transferred to different regions, and you have influence also among the regional directors, that you can be a channel of futures thinking in CHED. So perhaps I can just give our keynote speaker, Attorney Nicolas, a few winding statements as we encourage you to continue the advocacy for future thinking at Northwestern University. Attorney Nicolas.
Thank you, Dr. Malu. Once again, I'm just so privileged to share some ideas, some thoughts on how we can spread futures literacy, yes, among the academe, but also to all the communities that we are able to reach, the students, the communities around us, the ones, people in government, and all the agencies that we can provide input in terms of policy formation and sustainable development for the future. I'm just happy to also pick the brains of all our co-panelists here. All your contributions have truly been insightful. And this journey, of course, just begins for us here in the Philippines. I think we need to further advocate the spread of futures thinking in all higher education institutions. Be collectively bothered by what the future holds, so that we can all work together to a brighter and perhaps a more hopeful future. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Attorney Nicolas, and I'd also like to thank RD Freddy Bernal. Hi there, sir, and all power to you at the regional level for CHED. And I would also like to thank our Dr. Alex Brillantes for very provocative ideas. Thank you also to Sherman, and then Professor Morgan is still here. Thank you for bridging the Philippines and linking us to some global perspectives. Also, Sally, Dr. Sally, we thank you for continuing to work with the Philippines, the Philippine Futures Society and Association, and also with the BAP Graduate School for Development and Public Management, and reaching out to our legislature. We want to thank all the 80 participants who are here, and we're looking forward to being co-sharers and co-agents of futures thinking wherever we are. So with that, I'd like to also thank our Philippine Futures group here and our UNESCO linkages for the opportunity to be able to hold this fireside chat on futures thinking and higher education institutions. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody.
Thank you.
Do you want to have a photo op? There's 79 left. Perhaps
yes.
Zaza is ready with the photo op.
We had 95 at one point.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are more will be watching.
The replays.
Yes, I think day three of, is it day 3 or day 4 of the summit is still
It's
about
day
to
4.
open.
Dave,
Yeah,
Day 4.
it's still just about to open because they open at, is it 10 a.m. over there?